Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review. And my name is Adesoji Iginla, and with me as usual is Comrade Milton Alimadi. How are you, Comrade?
I'm good. Karibu Ndugu. Asante sana.
Yes, it's been one long week in Africa, and Africa has played in the news, not least. We will get to it. So, first things first, Ecowas is 50.
Yes.
And for that news story, we go to, and you will see how it all plays into everything we're talking about today. We go to Radio France International, who have the story that Ecowas, our budding buddy, turned 50. And the story goes, West African group, Ecowas, turns 50 amid struggle to stay united. The lead writes, celebration marking 50 years of the Economic Community of West African States known as Ecowas began in Ghana this week, but the mood was far from jubilant. The region's main political and economic bloc finds itself as a crossroad after losing three key members. And that's the logo, telling you it started in 1975 to 2025. And it leads Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all walked away from the group in January, dealing a major blow to an organization already struggling with security threats and economic challenges. You care to take an initial stab at it?
Well, I think we have to look at what was the goal of the organization anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
The goal was economic
integration,
political integration, as some say.
Yeah.
So to what extent has that been accomplished? That's the question. And to what extent, what are the main barriers to realizing economic integration in Africa and political integration? I think economic integration, the outside forces are much more serious, right? That need to be dealt with.
Correct.
The trading relations between Africa and the countries that are economically much more developed, correct? The domestic inside forces are our own politics, you see?
Correct.
As Cheke Anta-Diop said in Blank Africa, right? We have a problem of leaders who don't want to surrender sovereignty. So we have presidents of 54, and I hate to put it this way, but they're nothing really in the global system. Instead of having one president and maybe 53 prime ministers or regional prime ministers, you see?
Correct.
And that's the challenge. So whether it's ECOWAS, whether it's the East African Community, whether it's SADC, and whether it's the African Union itself, those are going to be the problems. And I agree with what Anta-Diop said. If we do not solve the politics first, we will never have the power to address the economics, you see?
Okay.
So that's the broad answer. And that's nothing new. That's what Ndugu Kwame Nkrumah had argued for, you see?
Yep.
Let's get the political house in order so that we can address the economics. So ECOWAS is facing the same problem. So when they say the three members left, they didn't just wake up one day and say we are leaving. There were a set of circumstances that pushed them out. When they had the change of government in these countries, particularly the last one, not the last one, but when they had in Niger, France wanted to use ECOWAS to reverse that military takeover. And they might have succeeded. But the leaders of Niger were smarter than France thought they were. So they quickly formed an alliance with Burkina Faso and Mali. And they made that statement: an attack on any one of us will be seen as an attack on all three of us. And that's why they're still there today, you see? So they didn't just leave ECOWAS for no reason. So in fact, I think the article is correct. ECOWAS is under tremendous pressure. If they don't address the concerns that cause these countries to leave, I see further disarray going forward.
Okay. So in terms of minor victories, it can be said that ECOWAS does have a unity passport,
Yes.
document that you could use in all 16 countries. And it's recognized. But when it comes to the economic union, that is where issues come into play. Not least the overbearing presence of the French.
Absolutely. So that is one good thing that you mentioned, and that in fact should be duplicated. That should be applicable to every African country. That should be something that the AU should have implemented by now, you see? And this is not to suggest that ECOWAS has not been useful. In fact, I sincerely believe things would be much worse had there not been an ECOWAS. Things would be much worse had there not been an Organization of African Unity or an African Union. These organizations have all intervened in major conflicts, whether regional in West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, So I'm not saying they've not been useful. I'm just saying they've underperformed given the expectations and the ever more increasing expectations. So there's going to be more pressure on these organizations to deliver.
Correct.
Including the African Union.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, to buttress your point, when it comes to regional intervention, and Liberia crashed in 1990.
Sierra Leone, all these countries.
So when they crashed in 1990, it became incumbent on the regional bodies because the United Nations was reticent about sending in anyone into, as they put it then, into the African continent, And so Nigeria stepped in, supported by Ghana, and eventually other countries contributed troops. The same thing also happened in Sierra Leone.
Right. One might actually argue that we would not have a lot of those problems had there been better economic and political integration. You see? Then you would not have an emergence of a Charles Taylor. You would not have an emergence of the Lourdes organization in Sierra Leone. You would not have the emergence of Yahya Jammeh, which also almost invited another conflict. But when he saw the Nigerian ships, I think he decided to take that plane. A lot of the conflicts we have are a result of our failure to really move forward swiftly and decisively on economic and political integration. And this is not, of course, I'm not criticizing ECOWAS for that. I'm criticizing.
No, you should. No, rightly so. They should be.
All of the regional organizations. So it's not confined to ECOWAS.
No. ECOWAS should be criticized. And the reason I say that is the idea itself was the hallmark of two generals, General Yakubu Gowon and Yasigbe Eyadima of Togo. And one of the cardinal rules then was no member will intervene in the political matter of any other member. So when you brought up the issue of France pushing Ecowas to intervene in the case of Niger, that was completely going against the idea or the tenet of that group. But there was one also point that we should also understand. One of the failings of ECOWAS, and in fact, I will put it at the doorstep of Houphouët-Boigny, was the subsequent assassination of Thomas Sankara. And lo and behold, when the guy who carried out the coup, Blaise Compaoré, was then to flee Ouagadougou, capital of Burkina Faso, where did he hole up? Côte d'Ivoire. So, wherein some members are hands off with regards to intervening, others have been a key tool in the neo-colonial efforts of France, specifically Côte d'Ivoire. It was Senegal at one point. It was Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire at one point when Wade was their president. But the moment, Abdou Diouf was president of Senegal. But the moment he left power, the so lucky position fell squarely on Côte d'Ivoire. And Côte d'Ivoire has continued to play that ploy, which, if I'm willing to take one other take on this before we go into our next story, which this leads perfectly into the next story. You are going to say?
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
I mean, what can I add to that? I don't think that's so much like of an ECOWAS issue, though. I think that's the problem of African weakness. We are so weak because we are these small countries that, in fact, France can make, and it was much more prevalent in the past, of course, make any one of those countries of the former colonies do anything. Just by saying we'll intervene, you'll intervene in your finances, you see?
Yeah.
So whether Boigny liked it or not, whether he was just the face, the black face of French imperialism, which of course he actually was, that would happen with or without regional organization. And that's the problem that we face even today.
Okay. I'll take your point. And so that leads us into our next story, which comes from France 24. And it's about, what can I say? Captain Ibrahim Traore. And the story is, like I said, from France 24. And the story leads Burkina Junta rallies supporters after claimed coup plot. The story is filed in Abidjan. Several thousand people rallied in support of Burkina Faso's ruling junta Wednesday, day after the military authorities said they had uncovered a plot, in inverted commas, to overthrow the government. Demonstrators carried giant posters of Junta's leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and Burkina Faso, and Russian flags, with placards bearing slogans such as "Down with imperialism and its local lackeys," and full support for President Ibrahim Traore and the people of Burkina Faso. They gathered in a central square in the capital, Ouagadougou. It was one of the biggest pro-junta demonstrations since Traore seized power in September 2022 coup in the West African country. which had been battling jihadist attacks for a decade and had killed tens of thousands of people. So on April 21st, the junta claimed to have undone a major plot planned by masterminds in neighboring Ivory Coast, with the arrest of several top army officials. Traore has regularly accused Côte d'Ivoire of Ivory Coast of harboring its opponents' allegation its neighbor rejects. Over to you.
All right. So there are many major problems with this story, right?
Okay.
Well, first of all, the slant. You can see the slant in the headline alone.
Yeah.
Right? Limiting it to a Burkina Faso rally, when at that time it became obvious that there were global protests in
That's
support
correct. There was one in London, in Paris as well.
all over the world, right?
Yeah.
So to localize it and then to give the impression that this is just engineered
Propaganda.
by the authorities
Yes.
to rally support for some fictitious coup that they concocted in their minds to galvanize support. You know,
Yep.
that's very lame, right? And
Correct.
when you write an important story like this, you should make sure that you have your best editors and your best propagandists, you see? Because you cannot reveal your bias so blatantly. How can you say
Yes.
he alleges that you're harboring his opponents in the Ivory Coast, and you say the Ivory Coast authorities deny it, and then you don't mention anywhere that Compaore happens to be at the Ivory Coast. And then Compaore is the same person who actually killed Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara. And then in fact, many people see Traore as the reincarnation of Sankara. How are you not going to mention that? You know, even an unschooled person reading an article like this would see the bias, you know? In fact, this article, the quality, I mean, I've seen propaganda, good propaganda. This one is terrible, lazy, very lazy and very shoddy propaganda. In fact, I'm shocked at the level, the lack of quality. You know, I'm shocked. They've done good propaganda in the past, you know, but this one is
they've let you down.
Shockingly bad. Shockingly bad. You see?
I'll continue. And it goes on. It says, over more than a year, the junta has detained several dozen military officers, including former gendarmerie chief of staff, Evad Sonda, accusing them of plotting or attempting to destabilize Republican institutions. There is one part here that jumps out, and yes, it says, and let me say what leads up to it. Prime Minister Rimtamda Jean Emmanuel Quadrago, who addressed the rally in Ouagadougou, also attended by several ministers and MPs and called by the National Coordination of Civilian Vigil, a coalition of pro-junta civil authority groups, civil society groups, then goes on to say, we must stand, that is Quadrago, we must stand up more than ever, because when the people stand up, the imperialists tremble. The Prime Minister told the crowd. That's a quote from Thomas Sankara, by the way. It's in his book, Sankara Speaks. The rally is condemning the hypocrisy of former colonial powers. Also took place in Burkina Faso's second biggest city, Bobo Dioulasso, and in Boroma. Now, there is a part here. Adama Kima, one of the organizers, said on the national television that the rally was to denounce the remarks attributed to U.S. Africa Command Chief General Michael Langley, accusing Traore of using the country's gold reserves for personal protection at the expense of the well-being of his people.
Okay, so that's the lead right there. That's the lead of the story.
Yeah.
That, in fact, is what inspired global protest. Why would people in the United States also protest? Because there are many people in the U.S. who are actually opposed to U.S. imperialism and militarism on the continent. So if it was only because Traore had said, oh, there was a coup plot, they tried to overthrow me, you think people in the United States would be rallying and protesting too? No. But he was basing it on credible evidence. In fact, who was to say that the statements by Langley in his comments before Congress was not being coordinated with people in Burkina Faso who were meant to overthrow Traore and then to be recognized by the United States?
Yes.
That's quite possible. I have no evidence to suggest that, but the timing seems a bit too convenient, you see.
Correct. And rightly.
And you cannot have your cake and eat it too. So the premise of the article is that the guy is making up all these plots, to overthrow him, undermine his government, destabilize. So he's making it up. So if you're saying that's the case, then it means the country must be stable then, if there's no problem.
Yep.
If the country is stable, then what's the issue? What's the problem then? It means there's no story then, right? You know? But if you're saying the country is not stable, then it would make sense. It's not stable because there are people trying to overthrow him. You can't have both stories, you know. So they must select one.
So, the protests or demonstrations, as it were rightly hinged on the statement he gave, that is General Michael Langley, in front of the Foreign Affairs Commission on April 4th, 2025, where he said, so the question to him that brought forth the statement was, what is the role China and Russia were playing in West Africa? So in his lead up, he said, and I am paraphrasing now, he said, I don't normally name names, but I'm going to go forward and mention him. Ibrahim Traore is one of the leaders who has cornered the wealth of the country and is using it for, to ingratiate members of a regime and stuff like that. So that's what the people heard. And rightly so, because
in Uganda,
go on.
The Museveni families runs the country like an ATM machine, correct? In Rwanda, the same thing with the Kagame and his associates, correct?
Correct.
In Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president, and his family basically own more than 50% of the land. If you're looking for individuals in African countries who use the country's resources for personal enrichment, there are many excellent examples. I just gave him 3. You see? So that does not fly. That story does not hold any water. In fact, he's even a worse propagandist than the article that we are reading right now. The general is a hopeless propagandist. And he's saying, I normally don't name names. Do you think he would name Traore without getting permission from the highest levels of the military command and the political structure in the United States? Of course not.
So you think
that's why we have this kind of platform to break down and deconstruct the nonsensical lies, you see? And any plan that they had, I'm not saying they will not move forward, because these folks that run the United States are very unpredictable. But they will now have second thoughts. And that is why this article is part of that propaganda, that regime change agenda. What obstacles now present itself to the regime change agenda? The global protest, massive global protest, including in the United States. So they'll fail to contain it as a local Burkina Faso story. Now it's a global protest. Anybody go on social media, prominent people are coming out. Some people who may not even know where Burkina Faso is located.
Faso is.
You see? are making comments on social media. So in fact, General Langley did a massive positive contribution to the government of Burkina Faso by rallying global protest, global support for it, number one. But this is not just about Burkina Faso, actually. This is about Africa. And this is a good thing. Now you know that Africa has many, many well-wishers all over the world. They're
Correct.
protesting, not so much because they know a lot about Burkina Faso. They're protesting because how dare the United States, and particularly Africa, try to impose its imperial agenda on Africa. So Africa, many friends of Africa have now revealed themselves, and this is an opportunity for African leadership to actually take advantage of it.
Yes. So, again,
we
you
condemn
remember
him, but we thank him at the same time.
You remember, if you can just tie why it's important that we study history in terms of neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Kwame Nkrumah mentioned the use of capital. Capital is the reason why they want Traore out of the way. Because he's now nationalized their gold, because he specifically mentioned gold. General Langley mentioned gold. He didn't say just money. He said gold.
And gold is a big thing right now, as you know.
Exactly.
Because of his commander-in-chief, Langley's commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, his erratic, the wacko terrorists have upset the global economy, is upsetting the price of various commodities. As a result, gold has been skyrocketing. So gold is very important in the conversation right now. And that's why he's bringing it in the conversation. But believe me, this is not some general who woke up and who normally reviews what are happening in the areas around where AFRICOM is deployed and saying, no, today I'm going to go and testify and I'm going to talk about Traore. No, it did not start that way. This is coordinated somewhere, and then they come to him and they say, this is what you're supposed to do. You see? Obviously, it's not surprising. Ever since Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali took the decision to start cooperating tighter and to expel French influence, which of course also led to the expulsion of the U.S. from the base in Mali. So imperialism has been regrouping and saying we can't just surrender this region. Now they're seeking support from Russia. We can't just do that. So what can we do? And this is part of the manifestation of what they've been discussing. Obviously, there's a bit of a problem also in their plans coming from his commander-in-chief once again, because he wants good relations with Russia. He wants good relations with Putin. So some of these plans now that are being manifest could be things that were drawn when Biden was still president, you see? Plus,
okay, so
this guy doesn't really have... He's less, when it comes to Africa, he's not an imperialist at all. He might be a financial and economic imperialist, but he's no imperialist like the Biden administration was when it comes to militarism and imperialism.
I think the point
and
you
that's
just
the
made
irony.
there.
That's the irony, actually. I mean, it's clear that he's going to bring an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine, something that the Democrats never would have done. So that also might upset plans to reverse what the Alliance of Sahel states have been trying to do, which plans might have been drawn up when Biden was still in office. So that would be my assessment.
Okay. Just to add one final note, the entire session of the Foreign Affairs Committee, where the U.S. wasn't just the U.S. African Command, it was also the European Command that sat there. General Langley mentioned three key things that I think might have been lost in the entire. It's about 2 hours, 12 minutes. I'm boring. Yeah, that's why I had to listen to it. So, in the 2 hours, 12 minutes, he mentioned certain key things. He said, whereas we were thinking that Kenya was the only non-ally NATO minor ally something, the designation, there are actually 4 of them in Africa. There is Morocco, there is Tunisia, there is Egypt, and then there is Kenya. And then there are other, how did he call them? He said, happy to work with the US group. He mentions a couple of countries. Again, it's poignant to see that Nkrumah's book, Neo-Colonialism, where he mentions the fact that our leaders are the major reason why some of these guys get to just run around the African continent unfettered, was underscored in that statement. And one final point. When you mentioned that Trump was not a globalist, Senator Weeks, who asked the question that led to Traore's name being mentioned, said something very key. He said, with the undoing of USAID, which was our bedrock, our way of entering the African continent, how is it that General Langley's work has not been undermined? That is when he started mentioning the fact that China now has a base in Djibouti and that they're dredging the canal that goes into the base to be able to take. I mean, it goes into greater detail into why is all of this important? It's important that we have to take our time to listen to these committees from time to time, not just when our names get mentioned, because they actually they were discussing strategic things in an open session. But I believe because of the length of time, they probably thought people would not be that interested. So that's just the point I wanted to make.
Right. And thank you for social media.
Yes.
Because of social media, everybody got to know about this general, and people are now calling him wicked names all over the world and calling him an Uncle Tom, saying they always use, one of our own to do the case.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, look, when it was Congo, a brother was a very prominent face, Ralph Bunche, right?
Yes.
And that's always the case.
Ralph Bunche.
It's not always like that.
Working in time.
Because it depends on the administration itself. And Ambassador Andrew Young was a good friend of Africa because his boss, Jimmy Carter, was serious about, tackling apartheid. Listen, a European American president who's willing to call Israel an apartheid state, that is a man who is a man of principles.
Yes.
That is why Young engaged against Ian Smith very seriously and said, listen, there's going to be an end of white minority rule.
In
what
Rhodesia.
You are calling Rhodesia, what is in fact Zimbabwe. And we are backing the Patriotic Front, So it's not always like this. And obviously, what are you going to do? Once you join the U.S. military and you're an officer, you're a general, what are you going to say? Oh, my ancestry is African, so there's no way I'm going to accept this order. No.
You're going to obey your...
Right. You're there. You're there or you're not there. Listen, let's not let's leave the general alone. Let's face the fact. We had an African American president in the White House when the order to exterminate Muammar Gaddafi was given. So on the scale of responsibilities and actions, where the front is the person that is of African ancestry, the general belongs very low down the chain.
Down the food chain.
If we have to be honest, yes.
Okay. Speaking of, you mentioned Congo. For our next story, we go with the Money Paper, your favorite newspaper. And this doesn't make happy reading, but reading we shall. And it's that it comes from the Financial Times. And it's that a mining group backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos expand into DR Congo. Cobalt bets country will be crucial to U.S. efforts to secure minerals for energy transition. And it starts, a mining startup backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos is expanding into Democratic Republic of Congo in a bet that the resource-rich nation will be crucial to U.S. efforts to compete with China for minerals that are needed for energy transition. Cobalt metals, which deploy artificial intelligence to identify untapped mineral deposits, was betting big on DR Congo, said Benjamin Katabuka, its newly appointed director general in the country. The company would recruit staff in the country and plan to apply for licensing to explore for lithium, copper, and cobalt, he said. The push into DR Congo comes as the African nation seeks to secure a mineral deal with the U.S. in talks as part of the President Donald Trump's ambition to break dependency on China for metals. What's your initial take? I know what mine was when I read it, but...
Well, I mean, when it comes to money, it doesn't matter whether you're Democrats or Republicans. In fact, Trump himself used to donate to both political parties, Democrats and Republicans. In fact, at one point, he was allegedly a Democrat as well. He was good friends with the Clintons, right?
Yeah.
Good friends with my party. So I'm saying all this to suggest that, just because, and in fact, Bloomberg, is a Republican, right? I don't know what Gates' affiliation is, whether it was Democrat or Republican.
Politically fluid.
I'm saying that it's not a coincidence that this is happening at a time when Trump has appointed, his daughter's father-in-law, right? As his senior advisor on Africa. In fact, it's not senior advisor on Africa. It's senior advisor on financial potential for gains in Africa. That's what the accurate title should actually be.
Financial.
Right. So, and his focus of Masoud Boulos has been Congo so far. So it's not by accident that Gates and Bloomberg are now also associated with a company that is involved in Congo.
Okay, I'll continue. And it says, Masoud Boulos, the gentleman you just mentioned, Trump's newly appointed senior advisor for Africa, last week said he and DR Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi has in recent days discussed the development of a US-DR Congo mineral pact and have charted a path forward. They're having similar discussions with other neighboring countries, Boulos added. Our role is to facilitate those private sector investments in the mining sector, including with American government funding, he said. DR Congo is the world's #1 supplier of cobalt, a metal used in the production of batteries for electric vehicles, but it's also in the midst of an armed conflict that disrupted mining in the eastern part of the country, where the M23, filled in the blank, has seized large areas of land. Berkeley-based Cobalt raised $537 million during its last round in January from investors including Gates Breakthrough Energy Ventures, whose backer include Bezos and former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. The company has raised $1 billion to date. Now, okay, so my take was that, and I like to couch my thoughts in history. When Patrice Lumumba suffered his ignominious fate, Nkrumah went to the United Nations and he said, and I quote, that for Congo to be free, it needs all foreign entities to leave. And I don't think that call has been heeded. So the sincerity of purpose when they come, bearing in mind the longest serving UN peacekeeping force has been in Congo for over 60 years, the longest in the history of the United Nations. So it begs the question that do the people really matter at all? Because every time you hear anything regarding Congo, you don't hear about the people. It's just money, minerals, and which rebel group is the order of the day. That's the only three things you hear about. Money, metals, and who else is got a shovel in their hand about to start digging. So the question is, what does, Congo do?
Not really Congo per se. It's the failure of African countries, At least Nkrumah tried his best to support Patrice Lumumba. In fact, he paid literally with his life. He was deposed, and then he ends up dying of cancer, There are many ways of inducing cancer, right? But ultimately, he paid a price. He paid a price for supporting Congo. What can Congo do? Congo alone cannot do anything, really, to be honest. Because, first of all, it's been very difficult to produce another Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. You see? Somebody who had that commitment, that courage, and that set of skills, oratorial skills, right? Not everybody is gifted like that, you see?
That's a fact. Yeah.
He was able to deal with powerful leaders who are bent on separatism within Congo itself and convince enough people that, no, we need to have a unified national government, right?
Correct.
To teach people nationalism in a matter of many months. Think about that. That takes some tremendous skill, right?
Yes.
There's no Congolese that I'm aware of that has that set of skills today to be able to rally and mobilize the Congolese to stand up against aggression coming from Rwanda and Uganda on behalf of corporate interests who prefer to just manufacture these fake wars in Eastern Congo, force people to flee from their homes, kill people, and then while these, and the term of fake media or fake news, it's actually true. It just happens that the person that uses it frequently, President Trump, is the wrong person to be using that term, you see? But it's true. It does exist.
Yeah.
So
of
rather
course,
than writing about this war of aggression from Rwanda and Uganda and the Congolese people paying the price for it on behalf of Western corporations who don't want to pay any revenue proceeds to the Congolese government, and they would rather just bribe the leadership in Uganda and Rwanda a little bit to allow them to use their countries as launching pads for these wars of plunder. You see? How do you stop that? You need a person who has the caliber of a Patrice Lumumba, of a Nkrumah himself, right? Of a Thomas Sankara, of a Samora Machel, a Steve Biko, Mugabe at his best. You see? You see people. You need people of those with those sort of skills. In Congo, at the moment, at least, none has stepped forward at this very crucial moment. So what is happening right now is that Rwanda was supporting its, puppets who perhaps could have actually engineered regime change in Congo and installed their own puppets running the show. So what Tshisekedi did was he ran to the United States, ironically, the same people who, together with Belgium, exterminated Patrice Lumumba, and he cut a deal with them. And part of the deal, and I think this probably, what he wanted to do was to give you this, I don't know the details, of course, but in his shoes, in his desperate moment, what were his options? So I know you want these critical minerals, and everybody knows Congo has the critical minerals. And a lot of these are in Eastern Congo. We can sign a deal, but obviously we cannot have Rwanda annexing that part of the country. But we are the legitimate authorities in Congo, and those resources belong in the Congo. So Budus spoke with them, he listened to them, and he said, okay, this is what we'll do. And mind you, I don't have any details, I'm just speculating.
Okay.
But under the circumstances, it appears to me there would be no other option except for what I'm speculating. We will invest. And obviously, you had the US talking about investing in Ukraine. And the president was asked by some journalists, if the US invests in Ukraine, but there's still conflict between them and Russia, would that not jeopardize US investments? And he said there would be no conflict if the US invests. All right? And I believe him. He's not going to put money of, his associates into that situation. So I think once they agreed that they would invest in Congo, they also assured Tshisekedi that there would be no conflict. And in fact, they've explicitly said that. Bulus has said Rwanda and M23 must withdraw. And Kagame is not in a position to say, we won't withdraw, right?
Okay.
Now,
so
to make it worth his while, it appears they've agreed that some of the minerals would continue being shipped through Rwanda. And in fact, some of it would be processed, value-added processing within Rwanda itself to create jobs in Rwanda. And he also included Uganda in that equation, so that Museveni clearly also has been told that we are coming in, we don't expect to be surprised by any bullets. And Museveni also is not in a position. In other words, it's an offer neither of them can refuse, right? Museveni and Kagame. But in return, there's going to be financial benefits for that. So if I am in Tshisekedi's shoes, if that is the deal, that is a deal that is preferable to being overthrown, you see? So let's say you have 3 years left on your term, and also this guy has 4 years, right? So let's say both of you have, I think Tshisekedi has 4 years left as well.
Yeah, 4 years.
Assuming that, completes his term, and Tshisekedi also completes his term, then Tshisekedi could use that time to build his own armed force. Something he's not shown the capacity to do yet, because this is his second term. So what would you do in your first term? But assuming he does that, then at the end of 4 years, it might not matter whether whichever US administration comes after Trump, whether they would continue to honor this deal or not. Because by that time, if you have built your own military capacity, you may not want that deal to continue as is anyway. You may not say, well, you know what? Now we actually want to do all the processing within Congo. And now I have a military that can secure my borders with Rwanda and Uganda. So those, to me, appear to be the options and the possibilities that lie ahead.
Okay. Let me, I'll finish this piece. There's a piece there I want you to speak to. The Bezos Earth Fund has pledged to protect the Congo basin, which the UN estimates stores about 3 years worth of global greenhouse gas emissions from degradation, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. With grants of $110 million, the Gates Foundation is supporting agricultural programs in the region. What do you say to that?
Well, they could be giving the money, but there's definitely something in return as well. And sometimes you need to do public relations because on the one hand, we know that they're going to make serious money with the deal that most of the article was discussing. So there's nothing surprising with that. $110 million is chicken feed to Jeff Bezos.
Wow. Okay. No, I was thinking, why would you entrust the chicken coop to the fox? But hey, it's one of those things. Because the Congo Basin is considered the second lung of the earth after the Amazon Basin. So to consider capitalists as custodians of your lung, okay?
I mean, you're still going to need money from somewhere,
Yeah, but still, not at the cost of a lung.
I mean, that he's not going to be supervising the operations himself. I mean, I'm sure the UN has some set of conditions that, with him, I think it's mostly for public relations. They do that all the time. They do for
so you think
to get the good write-up, media attention with the left hand and with the right hand. They're stealing from your pocket with the other hand.
Okay. And for our final story, again, we stay with the Financial Times. And this is something you've already called, but I would love to hear your take on it now that it has happened. And it is titled, South Africa Scraps VAT Increase in Dramatic U-Turn After Coalition Rift. Finance Minister forced into climb down on tax rise after bitter fight with governing partner. South Africa's finance minister has scrapped a controversial VAT increase in a big concession to the party's main governing partner after a fierce battle threatening to bring down the country's grand coalition. In a late night announcement, the finance minister Enoch Gandogwana said the proposal to lift VAT from 15.5 to 16% over 2 years has been dropped after extensive consultations with political parties, leaving a $75 billion, that is a $4 billion hole in South Africa's budget over the next 3 years. The move is the first big climb down after Godogwana's Africa's National Congress was forced into coalition government after last year's election, having ruled South Africa alone for 3 decades. The result is a victory for all Africa taxpayers, said Helen Zille, chair of the center-right Democratic Alliance, the coalition's second largest party. Asked by reporters whether Godogwana should stay in his job, Zille said the fiasco should make a minister resign. He has fundamentally undermined the foundations of that coalition and acted contrary to every agreement we have made until now, she said. Your initial take?
All right. So I'm disgusted on many levels, right? I'm disgusted because what percentage of people, particularly African people, right, who read an article like this would be able to decipher what is really being said? So let me just deal with one quote alone, right? The result is a, quote, victory for all South African taxpayers, end quote, said Helen Zille of the center-right Democratic Alliance, the coalition's second largest party. All right, so let's break down this sentence, right? Helen Zille. It's a European South African, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
The beneficiary of maybe 6-7 generations of European family, right? If you trace her lineage,
Correct.
if
Yep.
she's from the original occupiers from the 17th century,
Correct.
who have accumulated so much tremendous wealth relative to Africans, right? And who still hold so much wealth and who enjoy high income levels and high standards of living, right? And she is here saying, victory for all South African taxpayers. Just think about that. As if all South African taxpayers have the same level of wealth and income. And that tells you the magnitude of the problem that South Africa faces, that Black people face in South Africa, and where the ANC finds itself today. So that's what I meant when I said I'm disgusted on several levels. That's number one. Number two, just think about it. In the 17th century, the finance minister, Godongwana, right? Let's go back 7 generations. His father, mother, ancestral, going back 6 or 7 generations, they were displaced from some land somewhere
Correct.
for the benefit of people that look like Zil.
Yeah.
And we know for a fact that in 1913, although they made up almost 70% of the population, Black people in South Africa were designated to occupy 4.5% of the land, while the rest of the fertile land went to people that look like Zil. And now we come to 2025, and she's saying, victory for all South African taxpayers, number one. And then she is being asked whether Godongwana, whose ancestors were kicked off land and impoverished, right, historically, whether he could keep his
Correct.
job or not. You see? And you can always analyze it that way by knowing our history. You see? So when I read something like that, I urge our people more and more, please read our history. And when I say our history, if you're in Kenya, I'm not saying just read about Kenya, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, aka British demonized them and Mau. No, read South African history as well. And you South African, read Kenyan history. Read the history of West Africa, East Africa, and see how we are all connected. And at the end of the day, we are suffering from the same people who benefited from the suffering of our ancestors.
Using the same
And with
playbook.
knowledge, then we are equipped with the skills to reverse this. Obviously, South Africa needs to raise money to cover their budget. But the people that should be paying the taxes are people who look like Zil, or people who occupy the same income bracket as a Cyril Ramaphosa as well. Because there's the Black South African bourgeoisie as well. Let them pay. Of course, the money can be raised. But they should not include all South African taxpayers.
Africans, yeah.
That's
Correct.
nonsense. So that's why that quote is very insulting. She knows what she's saying.
Yeah. Like you said, if you're not conversant with the history, it's gonna fly over your head. So
Yeah,
when I
because it
was
sounds
reading
like
it,
something very fair. Yeah. See,
when I was
the
reading,
South African
wow,
taxpayers, when all the money belongs to one particular ethnic group, pretty much.
bro,
It's outrageous.
it's all of us.
Yes.
I'll take one final part from it, and it's similar. It says Cyril Ramaphosa parties, which portrays itself as progressive, is left licking its wounds
Wait a
after
minute.
putting
Just pause a
its
second. Pause.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important for listeners, for viewers, audience, to always read everything carefully. Don't allow them to slip anything past you. So, in the interest of fairness, let's go back up a little bit. I think there's one part where they described what
the business
there we go.
friendly,
Read that part.
which the business friendly, which argued the country needed deep economic reforms,
Okay.
spending
So
cuts rather
here
than.
we are not told that the DA portrays itself as business friendly.
Yeah.
We are told, matter of fact, the business friendly DA,
Business friendly.
blah, 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 blah. Let's go back to the ANC. President Cyril Ramaphosa party.
President Cyril Ramaphosa's party
Is it progressive?
portrays it.
Is
You
it
notice they
progressive?
didn't even mention the. They
No.
didn't even mention the party.
Which portrays itself as progressive. Yet the DA does not portray itself as business friendly. The Financial
It
Times
is.
are telling us as a matter of fact.
It is.
You see the propaganda?
It is.
It's
It is
amazing.
business.
You know?
It is.
But,
I mean, it's shocking.
listeners, viewers, you can become better and better at reading through the propaganda so that at some point, nothing will skip your attention. And you'll
Correct.
be able to call them out just like that on their crap.
Mm.
And once we get all of us at that level, we don't even have to tell them sometimes that, oh, wait a minute, this is propaganda. We can also pretend that we are not understanding what they're trying to do. Because then when we're negotiating with them, that might actually be to our benefit because we end up knowing more
True.
about their mindset than they think we know. Okay?
Correct.
Obviously, sometimes it's important to tell them, I know what you're saying. Sometimes you don't have to. So you use it also based on your own judgment, But you can't use it if you don't know what they're saying. That's the point I'm making.
True. I mean, it's the problem of Africa under the glare of Western journalism. It's often followed the pattern, the old colonial playbook, which is demonize and dehumanize them so that whatever it is we do thereafter is palatable to our general population, So you see it on the pages of newspapers. You see it with a general sitting before parliament. You see it even in the business deals. You see it. And like I said, when Congo is mentioned, the issue of you don't hear about the people. You don't even know who is there. It's as if people don't exist. So, and it begs the question, why? And that's the constant narrative. It's people
that
don't.
part I'm not surprised about because I know for a fact that many Europeans don't consider Africans to be people. At least not like that.
Okay.
You see?
Okay. Yeah. True. I mean, you would know based on Brother Milton's book, Manufacturing Hate, how Europe was demonized in the media. Yes. I've forgotten that you've written about it. So sorry that I should bring it up. Thank you for the reminder. Yes, they don't. They clearly don't. So
yeah, so long as we control the territory and their pride and their fails to make us disappear, like sadly they did to many indigenous populations in the so-called New World, they failed to do that in Africa. We are here to stay. We are really here to stay, whether they like it or not.
Speaking of here to stay, African News Review 2 is here to stay, and we hope to continue doing this for as long as we have breath in our bodies. And again, I must thank Comrade for turning in, week out, with the books, with the references, with the analysis. We owe you a debt of gratitude.
Yes.
And yes,
we will accomplish. Now, I'm sure there are already a few people who now read or listen to European media in a different way, even if it's just one person that we've impacted so far.
That's
that
one
is
person, many.
An achievement.
Yeah. So, any last words?
As I always say, as Brother Samora Machel said, Aluta continua.
Yes. And I have to go with the words of Thomas Sankara. Africa's population is filled largely with women, and we must continue to underscore the role of women in our society. And as he said, women are the mothers of a revolution. And yes, we do hold another podcast on this channel, and we'll be having that this Tuesday as opposed to Wednesday due to conflicts in our schedule. So this week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll be looking at the lives and times of Winnie Mandela under the Women and Resistance podcast, the lives and times of Winnie Mandela. So join Sister Aya and myself on Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern for Women and Resistance, focusing this time on Winnie Mandela. So you've heard from the comrade, and from myself, it's good night and see you next week. And have a prosperous week ahead. Good night for now.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.